Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Louisa. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and if you're coming back, welcome back. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about Eurovision, or actually we're going to be talking about the mental health impacts of witchcraft as evidenced in Eurovision. If you're not familiar with what Eurovision is, then it's been going for roughly about 60 years. It's a European singing contest, and it's always been a bit flamboyant and a bit campy and a bit strange. And it doesn't usually translate to commercial success. It's usually very much the B tracks of some artists, and a lot of the artists that enter Eurovision, they don't really get commercial success after Eurovision. There are some very rare exceptions, such as ABBA, but generally speaking, they go from obscurity back to obscurity. If you want to get some insight into what Eurovision actually is, there is a pretty good film by Will Ferrell, which actually outlines the story of like a band that tries to enter Eurovision, and it's very accurate actually, which is why the film is so funny. So I highly recommend if you just want to know what Eurovision is, or if you want to have a good laugh. So personally, I wasn't necessarily very shocked by some of the things that came out in interviews and some of the performances that we saw from Eurovision. I mean, this is pretty much par for the course. Their previous winners include the bearded lady, Conchita Wurst, who I have to admit was actually a very good singer. But just in case you're wondering, this is the particular interview that a lot of different people on YouTube and social commenters have been talking about.
Raoul from Euro Alpha question for Ireland. How do you feel qualifying Ireland after 6 years of non-qualifications? What makes you special, and what's your favorite part of your performance?
What makes me special? Come on! Come on! Do you know what makes me special? I'm a queer. Woo! And I'm a witch! And I love art, I love drama, I love theater. I'm gonna give you a show. I forgot the rest of your question because I'm dissociated.
Now, granted, even by Eurovision standards, this is kind of unhinged, but a lot of people got hung up on the queer and witch part of the interview, which is understandable because it's like, oh, she's trying to be shocking and edgy and whatnot, but it kind of falls flat these days because it's just so mainstream, to be honest. She's not really doing anything revolutionary or interesting. It's actually kind of boring. If anything, she's almost caving in to peer pressure, or should I say they are caving into peer pressure. I don't actually know what this person's pronouns are. But the bit in the interview that did catch my attention was this part.
I forgot the rest of your question because I'm dissociated.
So as someone studying psychology, this really stood out to me, and maybe a few people kind of glossed over it or didn't really think much of it. She certainly played it off as a joke, but the thing is, I don't think that she's actually joking. I think that she genuinely was dissociating. It's quite common for people to dissociate under all sorts of circumstances, but especially in high stress situations. And the stress doesn't necessarily need to be bad. It can be a positive thing. It can be, the greatest moment of her life, and she could start dissociating simply because her body is supplying the information that her mind needs, as in like, the adrenaline spikes and the heightened nervous system activity tells her brain that it needs to start disconnecting from reality. because that's how she gets safety. So, what is dissociation? I have a few definitions here. So according to like a dictionary definition, Oxford in this case, dissociation in terms of psychiatry means separation of some aspects of mental functioning from conscious awareness, leading to a degree of mental dysfunction or to mental conditions including dissociative identity disorder. And if you're not familiar with DID, or dissociative identity disorder, it used to be known as split personality. This is another website, which is actually an Australian state government website, which describes dissociation and dissociative disorders as dissociation is a mental process of disconnecting from one's thoughts, feelings, memories, or sense of identity. The dissociative disorders that need professional treatment include dissociative amnesia, depersonalization disorder, and dissociative identity disorder. Most mental health professionals believe that the underlying cause of dissociative disorders is chronic trauma in childhood, and that is well documented. DID in particular has a huge prevalence rate of childhood sexual abuse. Like, it's close to 100% of cases. It's actually incredibly high. And the reason why childhood trauma leads to dissociation is because children can't escape. They can't physically get away from abuse. They don't have the ability to overpower their attackers. They can't go to another home. They don't have their own place. They are usually abused in their own home by their own parents or someone who has authority over them and is physically more powerful. So in lieu of actually physically escaping, they mentally escape. And that's what dissociation is. It's mentally escaping from torment. One of the reasons why I don't think that Bambie Thug, which is her stage name, is necessarily not being serious about what is actually going on is because she's using the proper term. So she knows what the term is. It's dissociation. Whereas people who aren't really educated in these matters, who probably haven't been to like therapy or investigated these things for themselves, they would probably say disassociation, which is not the correct term. The correct term is dissociation. So she's using the correct term, and she's also displaying one of the signs of dissociation, which is gaps in memory, not being able to keep track of the conversation. And that leads me to the same website, but a description of one of the disorders. So depersonalization, derealization disorder is characterized by feeling detached from one's life, thoughts, and feelings. People with this type of disorder say they feel distant and emotionally unconnected to themselves, as if they are watching a character in a boring movie. Other typical symptoms include problems with concentration and memory. The person may report feeling spacey or out of control. Time may slow down. They may perceive their body to be in a different shape or size than usual. In severe cases, they cannot recognize themselves in a mirror. So this is not a small thing. This is not an insignificant problem to be dealing with. This is actually very serious. Playing it off as a joke might be a way to kind of cope and to make it a bit less stark and confronting than what it really is. But ultimately, she's dealing with some brain changes and some nervous system problems that make it hard for her to connect to reality. And that's the thing about dissociation, is it makes it hard for people to connect to reality and to connect to themselves. So there's problems with their sense of identity, their sense of self. They don't feel connected to like their gender, for example. And they don't feel connected to perhaps their name that they were given when they were born, perhaps because the person who gave them their name was their abuser. They often don't really know who they are. Dissociation can be one of the underpinning factors of things like borderline personality. Now, I'm not saying that she has a personality disorder, because obviously I don't know. But what I do know is that she does identify as being non-binary. I don't know if that means that she uses different pronouns. That wasn't particularly clear in any of the interviews that I saw, but that's essentially why she labels herself as queer. It's not because she's gay. She is apparently in a heterosexual relationship. So it has more to do with gender identity than it does with sexual preferences. Someone who has suffered childhood sexual abuse would probably have a lot of difficulty identifying with their own gender, because it carries a lot of shame with it, and so that makes it really hard for them to feel safe in their own gender. The witchcraft aspect, which is what we were going to talk about today, that is actually really closely associated with the dissociation. It's closely associated with that for a number of different reasons. The first reason is because someone who has been victimized and who has suffered severe trauma wants to be able to have a sense of control, and they want to be able to take their power back in a lot of ways. And one of the ways that they feel like they can do that is through things like witchcraft, because it appears to offer them power. It appears to give people power which is not related to physical size or muscle strength or wealth or, influence in the real world. It's more ephemeral than that. So they feel like they've gotten their power back. They feel like they have some control over different situations and over people who might hurt them. But unfortunately, it's an illusion, because witchcraft doesn't really give them that much protection or that much control. Unfortunately, instead, all it offers them is magical thinking. I was a witch myself until I ran into some very serious spiritual problems, which you can check out on my channel. I talk about that in depth. But basically I needed to be rescued, and thankfully I was rescued by Jesus. What Jesus taught about, suffering and things like that was that life is unfair, and there are evil people who get away with what they're doing in this life, but eventually it will catch up with them. And it might not be while they are alive, but it will absolutely be once they are dead. But the thing is, if you get into things like witchcraft, you're essentially joining the abusers. You're doing exactly what they did. You're trying to control situations that are not within your scope to control, and you're trying to dominate a situation which is not your right to dominate. And ultimately what you're doing is very unhealthy for yourself, because it does not address the underlying trauma. It does not address the healing that you actually need to get. And this leads me to the other reason that most people get into things like witchcraft, is because they are looking for healing. They are looking to heal those parts of themselves that are disconnected and damaged. But the problem with witchcraft is that it actually encourages people to dissociate even further. The New Age and Neo-Paganism tends to talk a lot about grounding, but the thing is that it doesn't actually teach people how to deal with reality, how to function in reality, and how to make good choices and have healthy boundaries. It actually does the opposite. Throughout my time in paganism and the New Age, I saw people, and myself included, who were stuck in toxic relationships because they were encouraged to employ magical thinking about their relationship and label it something like soulmate or twin flame. They were terrible with their finances. Like, they could not manage their finances. And I think there's a YouTube channel called The Financial Audit, and he's had a number of people on his show who are like heavily into the New Age, heavily into Neo-Paganism and spiritualism and that sort of thing. And they are in so much debt. And it's not to do with how much they actually earn, because they earn a lot sometimes. One of the women who was on there earned an unbelievable amount, like 5 figures a month. You would think with that much money that she would be able to manage quite well, but she was in massive amounts of credit card debt. And the reason why she was in so much debt is because she was constantly trying to, you know, manifest and to live in abundance and to like imagine that she was living the life that she wanted to live, and by doing so she would draw it to her somehow. But instead she was digging herself a pit more and more and more, and she was in way over her head, and she was unable to dig herself out. Why was she in so much debt? Because she kept going to find healing. And the same thing with another woman who was on the show. She was constantly paying for these courses and constantly paying for these gurus and these experiences to try and heal her trauma, instead of actually facing reality and actually facing what it is that she's working with in life, which is limited. It's not magical. You can't make money out of thin air. You can't just like wishfully think the love of your life into existence and then get involved with someone who is just as toxic and delusional as you are and think that it's going to work. Far from being healed, these people are being scammed, which in itself is another form of trauma. If you can hear some sounds, I have a cat in here who is snoring. And if you heard any like pitter-patter of tiny paws before, that was the dog. So in short, people dissociate because they are trying to escape from reality. And one of the ways that they continue to try to escape from reality is through things like witchcraft. And so that means that they're never really confronting reality and working within reality. And so their situation never improves because they keep using wishful thinking, they keep dissociating from their life, and their finances suffer and their relationships suffer. What I would personally recommend for situations like this is something called radical acceptance. So that is a type of therapy where you confront reality. You go, okay, this is how things are. What can I do with this situation? How can I work with reality in order to improve my life and find the healing that I need and have better relationships? Radical acceptance is not putting up with toxic situations. It's simply acknowledging that it is what it is, and you can either stay in the toxicity or you can leave, and you can do something different and you can find something better. And so it's not being stuck in the situation, it's actually liberating yourself from the situation by accepting the fact that it is what it is, and it's only going to change if you leave. Like, things will not change if you stay in the same situation. If you stay doing the same things over and over again, nothing is going to change because this is reality. And you can't force other people to change. You can't force situations to change. No amount of moon rituals or herbs or incense or whatever is going to change that. And consulting a deck of cards in the hopes that something is going to shift is just gambling. It's just the same thing as gambling addiction. It's very much leaning into learned helplessness, and instead of being proactive in your own life, you are constantly waiting to be saved by external forces, which may or may not happen. Far from thinking that God is going to bail me out of everything, becoming a Christian has actually had the opposite effect. It has helped me to accept more responsibility in my life and to be more mature with how I manage things. How Jesus described things in the Bible was not God being a constant rescuer. It was more a case of God gives us, the equipment that we need in order to do things, and then he instructs us to become stewards and to manage these things for ourselves. We have God-given intelligence, we have many different opportunities in life, and we have circumstances that we can work with. And if we can't work with those circumstances, then we have opportunities to change. So I have knuckled down and studied psychology, got my degree, gone on to postgraduate, am still working, hammering away at it, and just making do with the finances that I have while I'm a student. And it can be a bit white knuckling at times, but ultimately I have a purpose and I have better relationships and I manage with the money that I have. Usually because I have better habits of spending. So, not spending on frivolous things like crystals or white sage, things like that. Life is simpler and it doesn't need to be overcomplicated, and you don't need to be something different or special. You don't need to constantly prove that you are worthy of something, because being you is enough.
What makes me special?
The value that a human life has is not arbitrarily decided by other douchebags on the planet. It's decided by God, and God made us in his image, which makes us of infinite value. Bambie Thug doesn't need the recognition of Eurovision to have value as a person. Like, the whole question at the start of that interview, it kind of implied that, she needed to prove herself in some way. And the interviews that I've seen, she's spent years trying to get into Eurovision, and her chance is finally here, which is why I think, maybe she is dissociating a bit, because it's very overwhelming. But, she doesn't have to prove herself this way. She already has value in God's eyes. And if someone devalued her as a child, that's their problem, not hers. And they are going to have to deal with the consequences of that at some point. Alright guys, thanks so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care out there. God bless. Bye.